South Africa's working class says it's buckling under the pressure of a cost of living and stagnant wages. Workers say their finances are extremely stretched and they are finding it harder to afford daily basics. Experts say the high cost of living has the greatest impact on lower income households. Now let's discuss how employers can better support employees' emotional and mental well-being with psychosocial support. We're now joined via Zoom by Onyi Nwaneri, CEO of Afrika Tikkun Services. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I mean, that's the question, right? Are employers doing enough, to ensure that employees can cope with the mental, emotional, and the physical stresses, the current environment of business currently presents? I mean, if you've been listening just to some of the unions and some political parties just responding to today and the importance of today, workers have very little to celebrate at this point.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you to your listeners. I want to agree with a lot of comments that has come before me, that this is really, there's really not much to celebrate in this year, particularly this Workers' Day. Workers are under a lot of pressure. They're under pressure from inflation. They're under pressure from their bosses and their employers who want to drive efficiencies and productivity. They're under pressure from electricity. They have to go home and wait for light to come on to prepare food for their family. So there's disruptions all around. But even worse is that we live in an extended African continent or South African country where many of the workers are supporting unemployed family members or have lost jobs themselves and are being supported by other family members. And so that purse is very small, it's very stretched. Employee assistance programs would no longer be enough. I think employers need to start thinking seriously, how do we support our workers to become a lot more mentally and emotionally healthy against all these pressures?
All right. When you also, in our previous report, we were talking about the International Labour Organization's Global Wage Report, for this current year, saying that the increasing cost of living has the greatest impact on lower income earners and their households. When it comes to the increases, one would imagine that it would make more sense for employers to then look at this sector of employees and that this sector of employees would be prioritized, when it came to negotiations, as an example.
No, I absolutely agree with you that the lower end LSM sector of employees are the people that need to be prioritized, especially in terms of wage increases or even in terms of supportive programs that will enable them to be the best they can. And especially because these are if you look in companies, the majority of the people in the bell curve of organizations are sitting in that part of our organization. I can speak as Afrika Tikkun Services, what we do to ensure that our employees are supported. When we saw that inflation coming through, we started looking at how do we support them in terms of, even if it is lunches, food programs that enable them not to spend so much, because that pool of money is now a lot less. We provide things like, because we work with young people who are employed, we provide things like life coaches. We provide things like job coaches that will help those employees to start thinking through how do they navigate life in a very difficult economic environment. But more importantly, partnerships, things partnering with organizations like Lifeline, Power, to start looking at how do I engage with social relationships. So it's not just about, I don't always say it's about the money. I agree that there needs to be a much more focus on how we support employees who are in the lower part of our organization, who are earning less in the organization. But more importantly, what are those social structures? What are those psychosocial mechanisms that we can use to show them that they matter, to show them that we truly care as employers, but more importantly, as employers, that we show them that we care, that we're not just working with employees or workers, we're working with human beings just like ourselves.
I'd like us to touch on some of the things that you said, and particularly the constraints in which businesses can then support their strongest resources in essentially, its people. Workplace environments have become, a very much talking point, particularly those that are toxic in their very nature. How can employers ensure that at least the environment is conducive for employees to work? Because you'll find, some high regarded employees who are struggling under just the pressures of an abusive and a cutthroat environment.
So I want to start off by going back to what we as South Africans hold dear. We talk about the concept of Ubuntu, the concept of the interconnectedness of human beings that require compassion and must give compassion. So my advice to employers is to start off by recognizing that as South Africans, we operate under the principle of Ubuntu. I am because we are. I want to fundamentally disagree with one of the speakers previously on the show who said, employers are really struggling and therefore can do only so much. I always say that companies are creatures of law, and creatures of law mean that it takes people to move a company in the direction that it will go. If you want a company to succeed or fail, it's very much dependent on what you do with the people who move it forward or enable it to fail. And so as employers, one of the things that we need to be thinking very carefully about is how do we start treating people as human? Human means that we have challenges, and those challenges, we do not keep them at home. When we come to work, we carry them to work as human beings who are emotional beings, who are mental beings, who come with everything that they are into that workplace. And so I think a supportive employment environment, starting from direct line managers being capacitated to understand how to first say, how are you? How are you today? To really demonstrate those touch points of that we care, because it's not just about the we, it's also about the I, that individual who is in front of me. And then it's also about finding mechanisms for enable companies to give employees a voice to speak up. Without being judged that I am struggling. Those environments where you create psychological safety, that an employee can turn around and go to their line manager, go to HR, go to a peer to say, I need help. I've seen instances where we as Afrika Tikkun Services, we work with young people. When the pressure gets high, they run away, or they commit suicide, or they sabotage that job that is so dearly important to them because they can't cope anymore. And so for us as employers and people who are in the business of getting young people into employment or self-employment is to really recognize that Ubuntu is key to put systems in place to make sure that employees feel heard, know they have a voice, know that we care about them, and be able to ask for help when they need it.
Onyi, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate those important points that you were making. Onyi Nwaneri is the CEO of Afrika Tikkun Services, speaking to us there about just some of the mental health issues that will affect employees from time to time.